Hi, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Can We Talk About It? Today, we have with us another special guest. Everyone has been so different and special. And today, we have a law professor from Cornell. His name is William Jacobson, but I am going to call him Bill. And he's a clinical professor at law, Cornell Law School. And he's also the president of something called the Legal Insurrection Foundation, which sounds kind of interesting, doesn't it? Because can there be a legal insurrection? So we're going to get into that. But welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, Bill. So, okay, you had a tough time at Cornell. A law professor doesn't mean that you have like a nice cushy job and everything goes smoothly. What happened to you at Cornell? What is the story that led you to start this project of legal insurrection?
Well, I started Legal Insurrection actually back in 2008 regarding, I was very frustrated with the election and the media bias that was, for those old enough to remember, McCain versus Obama, first Obama, and very frustrated, but I'd never been political. I had only joined Cornell a year before. I'd been in private law practice. And I had a dinner with a former client of mine, someone I'd won a lot of money for. I was actually a plaintiff's contingency fee lawyer, if you can believe it. And we started talking, and we'd never spoken before about politics. And I think he just assumed that I was a liberal. And he said, "Who are you voting for?" And I said, "Well, I'm voting for John McCain and Sarah Palin." And we got into this long, long argument. And at the end of it, he said, "Well, why don't you start like a blog or something? I've never heard anybody explain your side as well as you do." I had no idea what a blog was. I'd never been out there politically. And I said, okay, well, maybe I should start this. So I went and I found Google Blogger, and I needed a name. And I said, like, word association, how am I feeling? And the way I was feeling, the word insurrection came to mind. That's back when insurrection wasn't as big a deal as it is now.
That's right.
And I looked it up, and by definition, an insurrection is illegal. So I said, well, that's probably not the greatest blog name to have. So I said, why don't I call it Legal Insurrection, which actually is something of a contradiction in terms, because an insurrection by definition is illegal. So I picked Legal Insurrection, and I started writing. And I started October 12th, 2008 was my first blog post. Got a lot of traction comparing Obama and McCain. And by the end of October, it was very interesting. I was getting a lot of attention, and that's when the letters trying to get me fired started coming in, the emails. And it was just very strange to me because I'd never really put myself out there publicly with regard to politics, how brazen people were, that they would think they could just write to my boss and the dean and say I should be fired, or the president of the university. They really felt that that was their, within their realm.
So let's pause on that, because this is 2008. It's before everybody was talking about so-called cancel culture, polarization. So this happened on your campus well before today's situation.
Right. And the interesting thing was that in those days, and really for several years, it was always people from off of campus.
Interesting.
Now, I knew that people on campus weren't thrilled with it. It was kind of the unspoken elephant in every room that I was in, because they all read it, but I was a lone voice in this liberal leftist environment. But on campus, they pretty much left me alone, as far as I know. I mean, I don't know what they said behind my back. But for several years, it was a steady stream of off-campus people trying to get me fired, harassing professors over the fact that I was on the faculty, threats. One graduation, the university actually assigned a detective to accompany me because they were afraid that somebody would disrupt the graduation because I was there. It was pretty crazy for about 5 or 6 years. And this didn't happen every single day, but it was a steady sort of thing. And it was amazing. And the other thing that was so amazing to me is that most, not all, not the ones making threats, but most of the people just used their own names. They didn't do it anonymously. And as far as I can tell, not a single one of them was an anarchist, a communist, a revolutionary, what I guess we would now call Antifa. It was none of that. these were mainstream Obama Democrats who felt it was their right to purge the law school of its one conservative, openly conservative professor. And that was always interesting to me. The law school administration always backed me up, always told me, don't worry about it. And I went about my business. And then something happened, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It kind of went quiet. It was very strange. It's like somebody blew a dog whistle that only the haters heard, and they stopped bothering me at work for the most part up until June of last year. And this time it came from within the campus and within the law school, not from the outside. And that was when I wrote posts critical of the Black Lives Matter movement in the week or two after George Floyd died and when there were riots and looting. And the one that set people off, and I know this because people have forwarded me emails and things like that, was I wrote a post when I saw the protesters marching with their hands above their heads saying, don't shoot. I recognized that immediately. That's the Black Lives Matter slogan of hands up, don't shoot. And it came from the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, something we covered at my website very closely at the time. So I was very familiar with it and I knew it wasn't true. Michael Brown was not shot with his hands up while he was saying don't shoot. The Justice Department, both the local prosecutor and also the Justice Department under Eric Holder, not under William Barr, but under Eric Holder, did a thorough investigation to see if Michael Brown's civil rights were violated and found there is no credible evidence that he ever had his hands up or ever said, don't shoot. In fact, he was shot after he punched a policeman in the face and tried to steal his service weapon and then made a second charge at the policeman. And that's when the fatal shot was fired. So it was a justifiable, unfortunate, but legally justifiable use of force by police. So I knew this wasn't true.
I have to ask you, at that moment in time, right, there's a lot of emotion and the country's responding to a very different scenario that involved George Floyd, right? And so you're focusing in on the situation that happened with Michael Brown as part of this bigger story. How much do you think it was that people were reacting to the bigger story and what had happened with George Floyd in your case, or was it truly because you were questioning the facts around Michael Brown? What do you like looking back at it now? Do you think it was the emotion of the time, or do you think it was specific to you in that particular point?
Well, I think it was probably some of both. I mean, the complaints that I've seen, and I haven't seen all of them, that triggered what was to follow were that it was insensitive of me to write this a week or two after George Floyd died. And, my view is that, first of all, that's not the only thing I wrote. I actually wrote about the George Floyd incident. Nobody's complained about that. But I did write that, it was a very difficult video to watch. It was troubling. He was handcuffed. He was already on the ground. But we'll see what the evidence comes in. But so I did write other things. Okay. And then I wrote this. And so people felt it was insensitive. And that's fine. They're entitled to think it was insensitive. But they didn't just leave it at that. They went and tried to get me fired. They went to try to get me fired for it. Okay. So it's not like people just complained. They went to try to get me fired. There was an email campaign by alumni. There was an alumni petition to get me fired. There was a statement by 21 of my colleagues denouncing me. I mean, they didn't use my name. They referred to some anonymous person, but everybody knew it was me. And they coordinated their attack on me with student groups. They actually coordinated it with student groups who then organized a boycott of my course. And so this was
a different reaction than the first time around when it was from off campus and your colleagues in administration supported you. And forward and
and it's all over, and it is kind of a classic cancel culture sort of thing. They then started digging into other things I'd written and found another post where I was harshly critical of the looting and the rioting, and they seized on that my criticism of that looting and rioting, which I think any reasonable person would see, was somehow an attack on people seeking justice for Black Americans. I mean, nobody could fairly read it that way, but that's what they did. So those were their two complaints. And I said, okay, let me see, maybe this will ride itself out. In fact, the dean himself was, at least initially, downplayed this a little to me in one-on-one conversations. Let's see how it goes. It'll maybe ride itself out. And then when I found out, people started leaking information to me who were really upset with what was going on at the law school. And when I found out that 21 of my colleagues, and not necessarily all of them, but some of them were actually coordinating with the student groups, I realized that this was not going to stay quiet. This was not just going to be private emails to the dean. And I went public with it on my website. And that created a tsunami of coverage for it, because in my 13 years of doing Legal Insurrection website, I've met a lot of people. Okay. I don't say I know everybody, but I know a lot of people in conservative media. And so when I wrote what was happening to me, it got picked up a lot of places. And I decided that it was really important for me to be the one first out with it, as opposed to the narrative being law professor responds to accusations of racism, okay, which is how it would have been portrayed. It was me going forward and say, wait a second here. Everything I've said is completely defensible, and this is cancel culture, and this is what they're trying to do. And in my post on my website, when I went public with it, I challenged them to a debate, a public debate at the law school.
Did they take you up?
No, they didn't. Okay. I
Okay.
said, I will debate a representative of the, I think at the time it was 12, it mushroomed into 15 student groups. You can pick your representative, but it's not going to be me against a student. You can also pick the faculty member of your choice. So it would essentially be 2-on-1. And I will debate you, and I'm calling on the law school to sponsor this debate, and let's live stream it. And my positions are entirely defensible, and the truth still matters. Even if it upsets you, the truth still matters here. And they turned me down. They rejected it. They said that I am just trying, they don't want to give me an additional platform to spread my hateful ideas.
Okay.
I mean, my hateful ideas are actually, let's just look at what the facts are of any situation and judge it based on the facts, not on an emotional political reaction.
Mm.
And so that kept up for a while. The attempts to get me fired were there. They're still hanging out there. There's still a lot of negative stuff on the internet. But the next month or 2 or 3 was really me doing media interviews, writing about it, getting an op-ed published, being on TV multiple times. And so this was me saying, wait a second, what's going on campuses, particularly at a law school, that, this is not criticism, because one of the initial reactions from some of my colleagues was, well, you just don't like being criticized. This isn't cancel culture. You just don't like being criticized. I said, I get criticized almost every day because of my website. I'm willing to debate you. You can criticize me there. I don't care that you don't like my ideas, but this attempt to cancel me, either directly through firing or by having a student boycott of my course. And of course, once there's nobody taking my course, there's no reason for them to have me. So this was like a too cute by half backhanded way to interfere in my employment. And I refused to back down. And the interesting thing, one of the most interesting things, is how much support I got. A lot of students at the law school emailing me, telling me, do not think that these activists speak for everybody. You have a lot of support in the building, but it's quiet because everybody is afraid to speak up and defend you publicly.
Yeah, this is the real theme. This is the real theme. And this is why we're doing the podcast, is we're hearing that over and over again, that there are people who are quietly sitting and thinking, what's happening is not right. We used to have that expression, see something, say something.
Yeah.
It's become see something, be really careful about saying something. And so that's good to know that you have that support. But what do you think it's going to take to help people feel as though they can speak up and express their point of view about the situation that's happening on their campus? What will it take?
Well, I think it takes leadership from the top, and that was sorely lacking in my case. In fact, the dean denounced me as well, said they can't fire me because I have job protection. It's not technically tenure, but I do have job protection and I have academic freedom, but he condemns everything I said. And of course, he misstated what I said. So there was no leadership from the top. What he should have done is what the University of Chicago did recently to I forget what scientist, somebody who teaches in physics there, came under similar sort of attack. And University of Chicago didn't condemn his thoughts, didn't condemn what he said, didn't say, well, we can't fire him because he has tenure. It simply reissued their statement about freedom of speech and academic freedom of faculty. Thank you very much. End of discussion. Okay. And that's what the dean at Cornell Law School should have done, but that's not what he did. And what he did was actually, whether it was intended to be or not, extremely pernicious, because by announcing we're not going to take disciplinary action against this person because he has job security, that is sending a message to all the people who don't have job security, the staff members, the junior, that you better be careful.
Yeah,
okay.
I see that. I can
You
see
know,
that. That's
and
how the silencing occurs. Yeah.
that's how the silencing occurs. We can't take this person out, but we condemn his remarks. And so there's no leadership at the law. There was no leadership at the law school. And there was really no leadership at the university level. While they say good things about freedom of speech, et cetera, they condemned publicly. The entire senior administration of the university condemned a chemistry professor who had tweeted out in support of the police during one of the protests in Buffalo, New York. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but there was an older guy who approached the police.
Yeah, I
He was
remember
told to
seeing
move.
the
He
video.
didn't
Yeah.
move. He
Yeah.
got pushed backwards, not hard, but he stumbled backwards and fell and hit his head. And this professor, chemistry professor, tweeted out that he shouldn't have approached the police. It was an area that was declared closed. He got within a foot of them and then reached for their belt, and they just pushed him back relatively gently. He brought this on himself. Well, there was the change.org petition to get him fired. There was the denunciation, and the entire senior administration of the university, this was maybe a week before my incident, did the same thing. Well, he has tenure, so of course we can't do anything, but we condemn his remarks. They have no place in a civil society, et cetera. So Cornell is sorely lacking leadership at the senior most levels. They say they support free speech and free expression, but when push comes to shove, they are very quick to condemn somebody who is out of step with campus, perspectives.
Yeah,
So
there's been a lot of effort, I think, to help inform and train administrations for how to respond in these situations so that they don't add fuel to the fire. And first, it takes convincing them that they need to have something like the Chicago principles or some kind of statement that serves as a bedrock. Every time you have a problem, we go to our principles, right? And so, yeah, I see that as sorely lacking. But I want to talk about something that you're doing now that probably stemmed out of your whole experience
yes,
at Cornell. But you have started to take a look at critical race theory and how much it's influencing campus. So I want to ask you, what's the project about? And I also want to hear, isn't critical race theory also a perspective that should have academic freedom and the same kind of freedom of speech type of standing on a campus? So tell me about your project and tell me how you think about something like critical race theory when it comes to freedom of speech.
Yes. To start with the second part first. Yes, absolutely. I do think that people who want to study and teach critical race theory should have the same right to do so as other subject matters. Where I draw the line and what I find very troubling is when that voluntariness of study turns into mandates and turns into the sort of abusive trainings, which really are turn into race shaming that we see all over the country. So yes, absolutely. I am not one of these people saying, kick critical race theory off the college campus. I think it's maybe a little different where it's elementary school, where you have a compelled audience. I mean, students must by law go to elementary school and high school. There's no law that requires them to go to a particular university. So I think it's different. But yes, absolutely. I am all in favor. What I am against is what's happening at Cornell and elsewhere, which is they're going to mandate these things. They're going to mandate taking a course, which essentially is critical race theory for all students, and mandate that students, faculty, and staff go through training programs. So yes, I agree with that. What happened in my situation is we created a website called criticalrace.org. And what it is, it really stemmed out of what I went through. It's strange how the timing worked out. My cancel culture experience, while it wasn't over, was mostly in June of last year. And then in mid-July, right after that, the president of Cornell announced a campus initiative to, in her words, embed anti-racism teaching into every aspect of the campus. And she immediately imposed training on staff because she could do that as an administrator, but as part of shared responsibility on campus, she left mandates for faculty and staff to be considered and drawn up by the Faculty Senate. The Faculty Senate put together committees, as far as I can tell, of all true believers in this. And I started to research it and started to look into it. And I actually wrote on my website that we are turning into a campus of mandatory compulsory activism. Because if you understand what anti-racism means, it doesn't mean what people think it means. It actually, well, it's Ibram Kendi, most famously. I don't know if he coined the phrase, but he's the most cited author on it. And his book was suggested reading at Cornell University over the summer. So I read it for free because they provided it online. And it was really shocking is what he says is that you are either racist or you are anti-racist. And if you are not actively seeking to dismantle the systemic racism at all its different levels, if you are passive, you are racist. So it creates this completely artificial divide that you're either an activist or you're racist. And so when I saw the president come out with this, I recognized immediately what it was, is that we were going to have a campus where you had to be at some level an activist for this. You couldn't just be left alone. I was going to write an op-ed, maybe a longer article, and we started to look into it. And I realized that this is actually more widespread than I even realized around the country. It's not something I'd been tracking in any detail. So we started to organize some resources, but we still didn't know what we were going to do with it. I'm still leaning towards op-ed. Others said, no, let's do something bigger. And then in early September of 2020, several hundred faculty members and students and staff, including the people on all these committees, or many of the people on the committees for the Faculty Senate, signed a manifesto demanding various aspects, that various things be included in the president's initiative, anti-racism initiative. Included among those things were race-based hiring and promotion, which of course is illegal, okay, and various other race-based actions on campus. And that's when I decided, when we have, prestigious professors on campus, when we have professors deeply involved in the Faculty Senate calling for illegal race-based hiring and promotion, something has gone very wrong here. And that's when we decided to create criticalrace.org. We started to do the research at my foundation. We started to document what was going on at various schools. We started to create an interactive website with a map of the United States where you could hover over it and you could click on your state, then you could click on your school, and we would list what's going on. Now, not every school on our list has active critical race theory or training, and we're more focused on the training than the teaching. We don't try to document who's teaching things. That's their business as far as I'm concerned. It's really the training, the mandates that are being imposed on people. And so we began to document this. We were hoping to get it out before the election. We ran into some technical problems with our map and said, okay, well, after the election's over, things will quiet down. We'll turn it live in December. Of course, as we now know, nothing quieted down after the election. We didn't want to roll it out in December when there's all this stuff going on. And then really, it was only after the inauguration that we felt the media cycle had quieted down enough. And we found a week in the beginning of February and we turned it live. And it was an overwhelming response. At the time we turned it live, we had about 220 schools in the database. We're now up to, I think, closer to 300. Our goal is to expand it to 500 schools around the country. And again, not every school on it has mandated critical race training. And this is not a boycott list, okay? This is not a list of don't go to these schools. What it is, it's a resource for parents and students that if you want to find out what's going on at the school, we only link to publicly sourced information, not leaked documents or rumors or somebody said something. And everything that's on our website, people could find if they had the time, but it's not always easy because it's not listed on the front page of the admissions office. It's not in their admissions brochure, okay? You have to dig through, a big university website complex can be quite, difficult to navigate, but everything we do, we have a link to. We have an archived link to in case it disappears. And we just document what they are telling themselves, what they are telling their students, so that somebody considering where to go to school, whether it's a parent or it's a student, can find this out. And that's what it is. The response was absolutely overwhelming. We're able to get a number of articles in major publications, Fox News. Then I went on Tucker Carlson to roll this out. And it was an absolute avalanche. I mean, I don't think I realized how much concern there is out there in the country about what's going on. I mean, I was on at 8:30 p.m. By midnight, we had 400,000 page views at the website. We had 79,000 people on the website at a single time. It's a miracle it didn't crash. And every one of those people had to type out the URL, criticalrace.org. It wasn't like a link on the Drudge Report where you just click the link. You actually had to type it out. And within a day, we'd gotten 1 million views. Obviously, it's slowed down since then, but that was reflective of the fact that there's an enormous interest in it. And one of the big feedback we got, people said, this map is great. When are you going to do K through 12?
Yes, I know. And so that is definitely a big topic. And I know a number of people are jumping into it, and you're going to be working on K through 12.
Yes.
And I mentioned to you once in conversation, I am curious what the correlation is going to be between the facts that you're reporting around who's got the mandates and what campuses have mandates and what their free speech record is, and their open discourse record is. And I'm curious as to whether there will be a correlation between those two things. I know it's to come, but I'm wondering if there'll be a correlation. Bill, I want to ask you something. So people listening to this, here you are, you've had some challenges on your campus and you took them head on, stood your ground. A lot of people are finding it hard to speak, forget about standing their ground. You've got a blog called Legal Insurrection and a foundation that's the Legal Insurrection Foundation, which sounds a little hardcore, honestly, legal insurrection. You're talking about, how people are being placed in these binary categories of anti-racist and racist and mandates and everything. But, I want to ask you, issues around race are very complicated. Mm-hmm. There are real things that have happened in history that we need to contend with. There are legitimate, valid concerns that people have. And then there are a lot of things that are happening that are completely invalid, or that in the name of protecting some rights, we violate other rights, or there's this very mixed, complex story here. Do you think the issues are complex? And do you ever get a chance to get into the nuances? I mean, I listened, as you said, you wrote about George Floyd too. And not many people paid attention to that or pointed to that. Is it complicated? Is it nuanced? And would you like to address those nuances?
Yes, and I think shows like this are where I get to do it, okay? And the issue to me is not a denial of the history of racism in the United States. I mean, it is what it is. It was what it was, but it's where we want to go. Are we going to go forward with what is the tradition of the American civil rights movement, which is equal protection and equal opportunity for everybody without regard to skin color? Or are we going to go into some sort of regressive analysis, which they have, for a marketing reasons, misleadingly titled anti-racism, when it actually is not? I think it was Professor John McWhorter calls it neo-racist, what they're doing, that they are justifying continued racism in order to undo past racism. And that's the Kendi formulation. It's not just anti-racist versus racist, it's current discrimination to remedy past discrimination. To me, that's a complete dead end. That is a dead end for our society, if that's where we're going to go, because it pits one racial group against another. It is never going to be productive. Demonizing and race shaming people in these corporate and university trainings does not change anybody's mind. In fact, it may harden negative attitudes because nobody likes to be the victim of that. And so to me, it is complex in the sense that where are we going to go as a society? And is this going to be, are we seeking retribution, or are we seeking justice and to improve our society? And if what you're seeking is retribution, you're seeking it against the wrong people, okay? You're seeking it against an 18-year-old college kid who never did anything to anybody based on the color of their skin. And that is just such a negative thing for me. And so, yes, it is nuanced. I'd like to have these conversations. I do agree there are policing problems. I don't think anybody can legitimately deny that. On the other hand, there is not a mass murder and genocide against Black Americans by the police. I mean, it's just statistically not true. Various people have rolled out various numbers, but it is a very low number, I think low double digits of Black Americans who are unarmed and are shot and killed by police. Should that number be pushed as close to zero as possible? Absolutely. But there is not this is being exploited by people. Are there problems with non-lethal policing? I think that's frankly a bigger problem. I think racial profiling, things like that, are very serious problems in policing. I think there are some things in the justice system that, of all people, Donald Trump tried to address in terms of disparate sentencing, things like that. So there are legitimate issues, but I don't view stoking interracial conflict. I don't view race shaming people. I don't view pitting people against each other based on race as the answer to any of this. And so that is the nuance I'd like to bring to it. But when you write something and people demand you be fired, and then you say, well, let's debate it, and they say, no, we're not going to debate you, then I think that we're at a really negative place. People don't want that nuance. People want to just score a political point. And I'm not sure how we get out of this because it is so pervasive. The Faculty Senate has been working on proposals, and at least as of the latest drafts, fortunately, they don't call for illegal hiring practices, okay? But they are thinking of mandates for students and for faculty, of curriculum to be designed by the very people who signed that September manifesto. Okay, these are the most radical faculty on campus on these issues. And so I think it's heading a very negative place. And Cornell University has a free expression problem. Foundation for Individual Rights in Education and two other free speech groups did a survey that I believe was released last October, and ranked Cornell, I think it was 43rd out of the 55 schools they surveyed, 43 being bad, not good. And on the write-up on Cornell specifically found, I think it was 2/3 of the students do not feel free to express their opinions on campus. And it was particularly bad when it came to affirmative action. What does that tell you? That tells you that there are a supermajority of students out there who have issues with race-based admissions, but don't feel free to express their views. Now, you may disagree, we don't know what those views are, but assuming they are against it, isn't it better to have them be free to speak and challenge them on their views? Isn't it better to try to persuade people rather than coerce them? You don't change minds by coercing people. They just keep their thoughts to themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's it, right? Ultimately. So let me ask you this. If the people at Cornell came back today and said, let's have the debate we didn't have, would you have it?
Yes.
And if you were invited to participate in this curriculum discussion, would you participate?
I think I would, but the issue there is that the conclusion was already baked in at the start. because the university
Mhm.
put forth Kendi's book on anti-racism as a university-wide read over the summer to be the basis for discussions between faculty and student, then adopted that language in the presidential decree in mid-July, the anti-racism, that must be now embedded in all aspects of campus. So that's off the table. Whether this is a good project or a bad project is not open for debate. It was never open for debate. It was a presidential directive. So now the only thing that was open to faculty senate discussion is what form is it going to take? I was not on those committees. I wasn't even aware how they were formed.
Right.
Maybe I could have been, and maybe that was my mistake. I wasn't following it closely enough. But I have been following what they've been doing, and what they've been doing is pretty bad. So I don't think there should be mandated educational requirement. So why would I work on what that mandated educational requirement is going to look like?
Perhaps Cornell can actually have that debate, or with the original debate. And I'm sure this topic would end up being covered in it, if they had it. So it's almost, we invite Cornell, the administration of Cornell, if they're listening to this, to rethink whether or not they should have that debate on campus. What you're reporting, Bill, is that there are students on campus that would probably really welcome a open and transparent discussion around this. They came to learn and to hear, and that means to hear things they might not like or agree with. And so maybe the Cornell administration will listen to this and they'll rethink it. And if they do, well, we will make sure to help everyone know that debate happened and share it. So Bill, it was great to have you with us
Great,
today.
thank you.
Good luck with all of your projects, and it must be hard to go to that campus sometimes. So I'm glad that you came in and shared your thoughts with us. There's always much more to what somebody's thinking than we can see or that we assume. And I really appreciate that you shared the deeper part of your thinking around this. I'm not sure people have heard that very often from you.
Great, thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Bill. Take care.